Let's get it started. So today we will discuss about breathing and exchange of gases, and in this topic we will discuss about the complete respiratory aspect of a human being, and side by side we will compare with some lower organism also, that how this respiratory system has been evolved in due course of time in the individual. Now in this topic, basically one has to understand regarding the gaseous environment, like what is happening in human being when one is inspiring some air inside the body cavity and then exhaling out air from the body to the atmosphere. Now, if we start looking and see that every living individual, every living organism require a constant amount of air, some amount of air in order to sustain their day-to-day activity. The metabolism, the normal anabolism and catabolism of human body and the organism, living organism require a specific amount of air, and definitely in different composition, in order to sustain its day-to-day activity and metabolism. So, we will discuss in detail about those gaseous element, what is the composition of atmospheric gaseous element, how the body system is taking those gaseous element, what is the mechanism of those exchange of gases from the environment to the body system, and then finally, we will see that how this mechanism works in case of higher organism, taking human being as an example, and then we will go in detail about the function and anatomical physiological aspect of our human lung. So, in next slide, if one can see the composition of atmosphere, this is very important in order to understand the respiratory system. So, the composition of atmosphere mostly comprises of nitrogen. So, nitrogen is approximately 78% of the total atmospheric content. Then comes the oxygen, which is approximately 21%, and then comes an argon, which is another gaseous element comprising approximately about 0.9%. So, if you combine and give a total picture, it comes about 99.9%. Now, some trace elements are also there, trace gaseous elements are also there, which comprise the total concentration of those trace elements are trace gases are approximately 0.1%. Now, this 0.1% includes methane, helium, neon, ozone, nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide. Now, in this topic, we will try to cover mostly oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, these are the two gaseous component we will try to focus our whole discussion of this respiratory system. Now, having said that, these gaseous elements are present in the atmosphere. Now, one can ask an obvious question that if nitrogen percent is 78%, why not this gaseous element is exchanged? Why not this element is important for us? Now, as such, if we consider this nitrogen, this is incredibly inert material. It do not want to change itself. So, whatever we are breathing nitrogen in is coming out also. Very less kind of fluctuation or modulation in between the inspired air and the expired out air. So, inspired is something which is we are taking in, and expired is something which we are breathing out. So, this nitrogen is very inert, it is very stable in nature, and that is why this atmospheric nitrogen is not used in normal physiological aspect in human body. Now, second comes the carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide percentage is also very less, but as such this carbon dioxide and oxygen is very important and critically regulated in respiratory system, and then we will discuss this two gases composition in aspect of their respiratory passage and movement and all. Now, having said that, these are the gaseous element or gaseous component in the atmosphere. If you start looking in our next slide, the step of respiration. Now, these are some critical steps of respiration. So, what is happening in this step of respiration, that we are focusing our content. So, suppose the air is coming from the atmosphere and coming into the system, and the system is body, either human body or the body of lower vertebrate, invertebrates and other organism, living organism. Now, this composition of air is coming inside. To take this composition inside the body cavity, I am just giving an example of human being here right now. So, what we are having is this cavity, we call it chest cavity in normal, and in case of biological term we call it thoracic cavity. Now, this thoracic cavity, which is comprising this kind of equipment which we will learn later as lung, is basically require a ventilation, right. So, what will happen eventually, this will undergo a pulmonary ventilation, anything related to pulmonary. So, the terminology, if you go and check the slide again, the terminology is called pulmonary. Pulmonary is very specific term related to lungs. So, anything related to lungs, we called it pulmonary. Now, this pulmonary ventilation is very important in order to take the oxygen content inside the body cavity, inside our human body. Now, the next step is, after getting this air inside the body, we need to get it diffused. Now, diffusion is another process where the oxygen content or carbon dioxide content whatsoever is there is coming in the body. Either it will be diffused into the body system, or from the body system it will diffuse out into the cavity. Now, we will again discuss this one. This is just to give you a better understanding that what we will discuss in further class lectures. So, the next step is diffusion, and next after diffusion, so suppose we have air in either in the blood vessel, and then we have air in lungs. So, we have air in lungs and we have air in blood. Now, this air requires transportation. Now, this transportation is the next phenomena. So, then the whole passage, content, oxygen content and carbon dioxide content is basically transported through these two area after diffusion, and later on very important to maintain this all process, right. So, the first one is pulmonary ventilation, next one is diffusion, and the third one is transportation. To regulate this, we need to regulate the ventilation, we need to really regulate the whole respiratory movement. So, if we go and again look into the step of respiration, we will see that we have first pulmonary ventilation, diffusion, transportation, and definitely the finally regulating the complete ventilation process of human being as well as in lower vertebrate also. Okay. Now, we will go in detail about this respiration. Now, we are calling it the chapter title stands for breathing and exchange of gases. Now, breathing is a terminology which is in the layman language, one can call that we are breathing air and all. Now, to really understand this respiration, we need to go back and look the evolutionary history of our living organism. So, if we start looking and digging back the evolutionary history, there is no such sophisticated organ system in lower invertebrates. So, if we start looking the invertebrates, invertebrates stands for the individual which do not have backbone. So, this invertebrates we need to understand that slowly in due course of time of evolution, the system get evolved. So, in lower organisms something else was there to carry out this process, and slowly in due course of time it got developed, evolved, and finally in our case human being, we have a very specialized structure what we call the respiratory passage, which starts from nostril. We will discuss now in coming a few minutes about the whole passage of the respiratory system, and finally we have lungs. So, we have very specialized structure in order to carry this process, but in lower vertebrate. So, we will start with a very basic invertebrate, do not have vertebral column, and the class is called phylum is called Porifera. So, we have Porifera. Now, this Porifera is basically sponges. Now, these sponges are present in the bed of our sea level. So, they are basically aquatic in nature. If we start looking at how they look like, so their structures are quite irregular. So, they have the complete body cavity which is quite irregular in shape, and then in the bottom they are attached to the substratum. So, their nature is sessile. They are not showing any movement. So, they are called sessile. Sessile is something which is not showing any movement, it is called sessile. So, these are sessile in nature. Now, what is happening? The whole body of this Porifera, these sponges are having very minute pore like structure. So, their whole body is having pore. Now, this pore is called ostia. This ostia is basically distributed throughout the body of these sponges. So, the water, because these organisms are aquatic in nature. So, they are living inside sea level. So, everything is coming with water. So, the water containing all the gaseous element is coming inside the body cavity, and then after getting assimilated, after getting absorbed through the body surface area, it is coming out through a very specialized structure which is called osculum. So, osculum and ostia are the two entry and exit point respectively in case of sponges. So, can we say that this is an entry, like oxygen is coming inside the body and then a carbon dioxide content is going out from this osculum. So, this is inspiration and this is expiration or exhaling out. So, this is breathing in and breathe out phenomena, kind of we correlating the phenomena with higher organisms. So, we are calling inspiration which we are taking and expiration which we are expelling out. So, what is happening here? There is no specialized structure. So, the whole body surface area, so we can call body surface is the actual unit of exchange of gases in these sponges. Now, these sponges are very specialized lower invertebrates. So, slowly it got evolved, and because of evolution the whole structure got modulated in order to sustain this respiratory process. But this is in nutshell about this. We are not going to discuss much about the whole Porifera as such phylum, but we will try to understand that why these are exchanging the gases to the surface area, because they lack any specialized respiratory organ in their body. Next in the slide is Coelenterata. So, in Coelenterata we have an ideal example, and this ideal example is what we call Hydra. So, the phylum Coelenterata comprises of many other organisms, and one such organism is called Hydra. If you start looking into the Hydra structure, this is again a very cylindrical kind of structure, and then again they have opening, and this opening is kind of surrounded by this kind of cilia or tentacle like structure, which is basically situated in the top of their body surface cavity. Now, same thing here also, this body surface area is basically the unit of exchange of gases in case of Coelenterata. So, Coelenterata also they have both mode of life, they are aquatic in nature, mostly aquatic in nature, but then there are certain variety which are terrestrial in also in nature. Of course, we are not going to get and dig in detail about those one, but again the surface area, the body surface area is the actual unit of exchange of gases in this species. The next one is very important, and that is called Platyhelminthes. Now, Platyhelminthes is a very specific terminology. The phylum Platyhelminthes comprises of the organisms which are flat in nature. So, they are otherwise called as flatworm. flat worm. So, this flat worm, just trying to give an understanding about why they are called as flat worm. So, we have, if we start looking into human body, this belly portion is called ventral. So, this belly portion is called ventral, and then something which is coming from the back is called dorsal. So, we call ventral. So, ventral is what is there in the belly, and then we have another thing which is called dorsal. In between ventral and dorsal, we have a body cavity. If you remove body cavity, there is nothing in between. So, if we squeeze between the ventral and the dorsal surface, there will be a flat surface. Now, this worm is like that. So, they have a body like this. So, they have this area, we can call it, this is the ventral, and in the back portion, they have dorsal from that side, and there is no as such defined body cavity. We can say there is something in between, but we cannot call it in lower invertebrate as a body cavity, but as such they have dorso-ventrally flattened surface. That means the whole surface area is quite flat. So, this flat surface area is basically the unit of exchange of gases. So, the gases, because of this large surface area, they are exchanging the gases quite efficiently as compared to other species. There is slight advancement in these species in order to increase the surface area. So, their whole body is squeezed in order to increase the surface area to exchange the gases. This is about the flatworm, Platyhelminthes. The next in the slide is Annelida. Now, this Annelida is including the organism which are round and cylindrical in nature, and a classical example is earthworm. Now, this earthworm is basically the cylindrical in nature. So, they have cylindrical and their whole body is segmented. So, their whole body area is divided into segments, and these segments are called as cuticles. Now, this cuticles is an area or the aspect which are involved in gaseous exchange. So, basically the surface area, the cuticle is involved in gaseous exchange in case of this Annelida, the earthworms. So, slowly we can see that we are evolving, right. So, the body is basically segmented. In classification, we will see that these structures are called metameres, and these annelids are basically segmented, and metameres is a terminology which defines the segment body cavity. So, these are some of the structures are there which are defined in case of Annelida. Now, so as I said earlier that organisms get evolved in due course of time. Now, that thing happened, and we have the organism evolved, and one such evolved organism next in our slide is Arthropoda. So, this Arthropoda is arthro means joint. So, their poda means leg. So, they have joint leg appearance. So, their whole body is having a joint leg, appendages and everything is joined with each other. Now, this Arthropoda is living in both terrestrial condition and aquatic. That means, they are terrestrial, and they are also aquatic. That means, they can live in water and they can live in land also. Terrestrial means someone who can survive in land condition and someone who can survive in water, aquatic condition. To sustain the aquatic mode of life, these organisms evolved in such a way that they have a very specialized structure called gills. Now, gills are very specific. There are varying number of gills. So, the oxygen dissolved water or gaseous element dissolved water is passing through the gills, and through the passage the gases are getting exchanged in these gills. While in case of terrestrial arthropods, the very specialized structure, we are not saying that these are not that much evolved, but we are not calling those evolved organ as lung, but we called it book lung. So, book lungs is a structure available in terrestrial arthropod in order to exchange the gases from the atmosphere to the body cavity. So, these are two very specialized structure in this arthropod species that can have the effective exchange of gases from atmosphere to body cavity. Now, having said that, these are some of the modifications, some of the things available in the body cavity of lower invertebrates. Now, we are not going to go in detail about this lower invertebrate. We will try to focus our whole study to higher vertebrates like human beings, because this whole chapter is about human physiology. Now, in human physiology, the whole thing is about a very specialized structure called lungs. So, as we discussed earlier, that inhalation of gases is an important aspect and expiration of gases is an important aspect. Now, if we look very critically what is happening today in day-to-day activity, one can realize that we are taking the oxygen and related content from our nostril as well as our mouth also. So, if we draw roughly, so what is happening that you have this nostril is one passage. So, you have nostril and then we have this mouth. So, kind of a normal passage. So, the air, normal air, the mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide and other gases are getting entry inside the body through either nostril or the mouth. So, there is a common passage which is kind of available in this particular area, which is both common for nostril as well as mouth, and this particular area is called pharynx. So, this pharynx is a very unique structure which is available in the upper buccal cavity, which is very common to nostril and the mouth cavity. This passage is ultimately narrowing down to a very unique structure, and these are the first entry point or the first entrance to the respiratory passage, and these are called as larynx. Now, this larynx is a very important organ in respiratory system. These are the entry, these are the first organ in the respiratory passage. In case of adult male, this larynx are basically protruded out. This larynx comprises of cartilage. So, sometime this protruded version of the larynx, and one can feel this depression here in the cartilaginous area. This is sometime in adult human beings, male, is called Adam's apple. So, this Adam's apple is basically an indication of the sound system of a male individual, and these larynx and Adam's apple are sometimes collectively called as sound box. So, basically these are the sound producing organ. While similar kind of a structure is available in case of parrot, where we are not calling this structure as a larynx, but we are calling it as a syrinx, which is very sweet kind of sound producer. So, this whole area is basically the entry point in case of respiratory system. This larynx is basically continued to a cartilaginous structure which are having a round ring-like structure. This round ring-like structure is called trachea. So, this trachea is another cartilaginous structure which is basically giving passage and kind of availability to or passage to the gaseous material. This trachea at the level of fifth rib. So, we will discuss about this aspect. So, this is kind of a if we discuss, so these are the level of fifth rib. So if you see, these are the ribs, and in the level of fifth rib actually, so this fifth rib, if you count 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, in the fifth rib, this particular kind of bifurcation is visible in case of trachea. So this bifurcation is called bronchi. Now these bronchi are the terminal part of this trachea. So there is a cartilaginous ring, and at the level of fifth rib there is a bifurcation, and this bifurcation is leading into two distinct kind of bronchi. Now these two bronchi is going to a very distinct kind of a capsulated structure, which is kind of like this, and these are the specialized structure of respiration, and these are called lungs. So these are basically structure of lungs which are containing these bronchi into it. Now we will see and we will describe this whole lung system as such in detail. So we'll try to understand here the oxygen entry point and the whole aperture, the openings which are responsible to getting this in our nostril and mouth. These are coming into an area called pharynx. Pharynx is continuing into a very specialized structure called larynx, and this larynx is continuing into a cartilaginous ring-like structure called trachea. And this trachea, if we start looking and going back to the tissue level, what kind of tissue structure here? So these are stratified squamous epithelium cells which are having a kind of a ciliated like structure, which we'll try to discuss in our later classes. And then at the level of fifth rib, these tracheal rings containing structure are bifurcating into bronchi, which is ultimately going inside this very specialized unique structure called lungs. So we will discuss this lung structure in next. So what we have understood till now is the passage and the ultimate organ. Now here is trachea, and this trachea is coming into a very specialized structure, and these are basically roughly a lung. Now these lungs are basically, we can differentiate, this one is a right and this one is a left. In human being, this right lung, right lobe of the lung is divided into three: upper, middle and lower. And in case of left, we have only upper and lower. And instead of the complete structure, we have a small groove here. This groove is basically a notch that can have a very specialized mechanism, because this is the area where you have this very specialized structure. We call it heart. So this whole area, this curvature in this lung, left lung, is called cardiac notch. Cardiac notch. Now, this whole lung as such is covered by a very specialized kind of a membrane in order to protect the complete covering. This unique covering of lung is called pleura. So pleura is a very specialized structure, a kind of a membrane, a kind of a covering that is protecting the lung, lobes of lung with their unique structure. And this pleura is nicely demarcating lungs with the other organs in the body. And since we discussed that these ribs are already here, in between ribs you have muscles. These muscles are called as intercostal muscle, and in the bottom you have a very unique kind of a structure which is very much flexible and giving an actual mechanism of respiration, and this structure are called diaphragm. Now this diaphragm is the organ or the area which gives flexibility which is required later time point for inhalation and expiration. We'll discuss this mechanism in later time. So till now we have this lung and lung lobes, upper and lower, and then these right lobes of lung is differentiated into 3 lobes, while in case of left one we have upper and lower. Sometimes we all know that there are always kind of a thrust and injuries going on in our body. In case of lung, very fragile organ. So sometimes if you have any infection, sometimes if you have any kind of a inflammation, any kind of a injury around lung cavity, this particular area is getting inflamed, and because of this inflammation, this particular area in between lung lobe and the pleural membrane is filled up with fluid. So this whole area is getting filled with a fluid at the time of inflammation, and this fluid is giving a kind of a force to this lung, having a distress in respiration. The condition where we have an inflammation of the lung lobe and the pleural cavity is called pleuritis. So we call pleuritis. So we have very unique kind of an inflammatory process where the pleural membrane is getting inflamed, and the fluid filled cavity is, the condition is called pleurisy sometime due to inflammation and all. So these are the typical anatomical model where the lung structure is divided with the help of this unique pleural membrane. We have ribs is kind of a cage like a structure, and then outer covering is what we have called pleural membrane, and this pleural membrane is sometimes getting inflamed and converting and getting a condition called pleuritis. This pleuritis is sometimes getting accumulation of the fluid called pleurisy. So these are some of the anatomical features related to this bronchi and lungs. So to understand the alveoli, what is there in the alveoli? So say this is our trachea, and this trachea is bifurcating at the level of 5th rib, in the level of ribs, and then this specific terminal branches of bronchi, we call this one as bronchi. Now this bronchi is basically branching out into smaller, so there are many branching pattern. So this branching pattern is there, so many branches are there, and this branching pattern is called bronchioles. Bronchioles. Now this bronchioles is the terminal aspect, terminal point of this bronchi. Now this bronchiole, if you start looking bronchioles in detail, they have a very kind of globular structure, this globular structure. Now this globular structure is what we call alveoli. So these are the alveoli, and if we start digging again back and see that what are the actual content of alveoli, we can call this one as an alveoli sac. So, we can call it this is a sac. So, this is a bag like structure, anything related look like bag we call sac in biology, and then we have a small kind of duct following through the this thing. So, we call it duct. So, we have alveoli sac and the alveoli duct. So, these are actually the content of alveoli. So, we have sac and duct. Now, this structure is quite elastic because we need to inspire the air. Once air is going, there is a huge flexibility, and because of this flexible movement, the things are expanding in and out. So, we need some very specialized elastic fiber. So, there are small fibers which are quite distributed throughout this area, and these are all elastic fibers, elastic fiber, and of course, this whole area is what we call lungs. So, these are basically lungs. So, these are specialized structure, and this alveoli is the terminal point where we need to understand the exchange of gases. So, now we will try to see what is happening exactly at the level of alveoli where the exchange of gases takes place. Now, having said that, so this terminal part is very flexible, and this regulation of ventilation, another thing which we discussed in the very beginning of our lecture, that we require to intake the air, and for that we need ventilation. So, this pulmonary ventilation is very much regulated by this elastic filament, and of course, there are many muscles involved in this process which we will discuss in our coming lecture. Now, if we see this is the alveoli, and then if we start looking the structure of this much of the alveoli, and if you look in this alveoli, one can see that these are very unique epithelium. These epitheliums are very, very thin, and because of the thin nature, these are called squamous epithelium. Now, this squamous epithelium is available in the lining of this alveoli, and in this alveoli, this lining, this small lining is important because there requires an effective diffusion of gases from alveoli to the blood vessels. Now, this whole structure, which are very unique here, basically comprises of a very thin nucleus which is bulged out in this area. So, these are the lining of this very structure called alveoli. So, this squamous epithelium are the ultimate. So, we have here oxygen and we have here CO2, and then in this area we have this blood coming into the system. Now, this blood, there are two kind of blood vessels which we will discuss again in our coming lectures. One which can carry the pure blood. Although all arteries of the blood, all arteries of the body carry the pure blood, but pulmonary artery is one such artery in the body that carry the impure blood. While opposite is true in case of veins. All veins carry the impure blood, but pulmonary vein is one such vein in the body that carry the pure oxygenated form of the blood. So, now since this is the blood, so here the concentration of oxygen is very high. So, oxygen is moving from higher gradient to lower gradient. So, oxygen is coming here. Since this blood is coming from the tissue side, the concentration of CO2 is quite high here. Now, the CO2 concentration from this area is getting exchanged in this direction because of the higher concentration to lower concentration. So, we will discuss about this mechanism in our coming lectures, where we will see how this gaseous exchange takes place in terms of the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide molecule in terms of mm of mercury. So, these are in nutshell about the complete mechanism, complete picture, complete anatomical structure of the human respiratory passage, right from the nostril and mouth and till the alveoli, which is the ultimate unit where the exchange of gases takes place. So if we summarize the whole anatomical structure and the physiological function of respiratory passage, one can nicely jot down the whole phenomena into few things. One, the gases are coming inside the body, which are mixture of oxygen, nitrogen and carbon dioxide, and these gases are kind of traveling downstream in this passage, which is called respiratory passage, and coming to a very specialized structure called alveoli. And from this alveoli, one can nicely see, because of this unique structure, unique epithelium called as the Swamis Epithelium, the gases are exchanged from the higher concentration to lower concentration.